Sonic, the heart of your system.
What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Lian Li Strimer RGB cables. Now yes, these were sort of announced at Computex. We had them in one of our Lian Li builds, but today we finally have a chance to check them out. Quite a few people have already checked these out already on YouTube, but I thought I'll sort of check them out and see how they go. I've been using them in my main system for quite a while. I've had no issues at all. The only thing I can say sort of straight away is if you've got a really bright system with a heap of LEDs, LED strips, LED fans, they do sort of suffer because then the focal point isn't on these and they do get washed out a bit with a heap of lights around them. So we'll check it all out, and we're actually going to go a little bit further than just checking out the cables on their own. We've built a system for these specifically, and we're also going to hook these up to ASUS Aura Sync. We've got things like the motherboard in sync, the fans, the cables, some of the water cooling components. So it's actually really interesting to see the complete system sort of interact together, and even with the cables as well. So what we'll do is we'll check out and we'll see how it all goes. Originally teased at Computex this year, the RGB streamer cable is finally available for consumers to purchase. You may have seen in our Lian Li Computex build, we had an early model of the 24-pin streamer cable. Since then, Lian Li has refined the streamer, and the 24-pin extension retails for $40 US, while the GPU streamer comes in at $30 US. It's also important to note that the GPU kit comes with two 8-pin GPU extensions, which are breakable to two 6-pin GPU extensions. This will certainly cover most GPU options. For those people interested on how the actual setup works, it's quite simple. We have a standard white sleeved extension, which then has a string of RGB optic wires that clip over the top. Once opening the streamer box, the sleeved extension and RGB overlay come in two separate units. It's up to you to attach the two together. Lian Li have included a tool to help push the extension cable into the RGB overlay holder. This is only required on the GPU extensions and not needed on the 24-pin. I found I didn't need the tool, and I just made sure I pushed one wire in at a time. Another tip is to make sure you have the orientation correct for how you'll be routing your GPU cables. Also note the power plugs on your GPU and if the notch is facing up or down. Also make sure the control unit for the RGB overlay is at the end of the cable, not at the start where the extension plugs into your device. Once the RGB overlay is fully attached, it's time to install them in your system. As the sleeved extensions are quite stiff, it takes a bit of time and work getting the cables to look just right. Too much of a bend will cause the extensions to bulk up. You may find you will need to pre-bend the whole unit outside the case first and train the cable to its correct shape. Yes, I know this sounds weird, but if you've ever used extensions before, this is quite common. To power and control the streamer, Lian Li have included a PCI I/O control unit. Now for me, I think these are a thing of the past. Today it should either be by remote or by motherboard RGB. Now the supply control unit works well, but reaching to the back of your PC to change modes and brightness is really only good for setting the unit up. Now instead of just taking a look at the streamer cables on their own, we actually went ahead and set up a whole system to show you how to implement the streamer and sync it all up with the ASUS Aura software. Yes, okay, we may have gone a bit all out with our build. Motherboard of choice is the Strix Z370F Gaming, which has the required 5V addressable RGB header needed to control the streamer. Memory is 32GB of Zadak Moab RGB, and yes, having three 8-pin GPU connectors on our 1080 Ti, we did need a second lot of streamer GPU cables. I guess the biggest standout part in this build is the Bixby water channel plate we've used. Ever since the O11 Dynamic was released, more and more companies are releasing add-ons for this chassis. If you've ever built an RGB system, you're probably familiar with all the different implementations of addressable RGB. There's really no standard and many companies use their own connectors. The most widely used connector is the one found on the ASUS motherboards. The 3-pin connector is the brother of the older 4-pin static RGB. Luckily, in the ASUS motherboard box, we have a converter cable to directly connect to the strimmer, then to the motherboard 5V RGB header. If you have one RGB device, then this is all we need to do, but we've got a few more devices than that. In this build, our RGB devices include CPU block, GPU block, water channel, and strimmer RGB cables. As the strimmer cables can be daisy chained, we only need to allocate one slot for them. As we have 4 separate RGB devices, we've picked up an ASUS PC 8-port addressable 5V RGB splitter. This unit will set you back about $20 US. Simply connect this to the ASUS 5V RGB header and then a spare SATA cable to power it. One very important note with the ASUS PC controller I found is that the polarity is not filtered. If you connect your 5V RGB cables in reverse, you will blow up your RGB strip. Most companies have prevented this from happening as they are keyed, but I have found some 5V RGB strips still use the older 4-pin connector, allowing the connector to be installed either way. The best way I have found is that all connectors I've seen come with an arrow. The arrow aligns to the end with 2 pins, not to the end with the single pin. If you align the arrow to the single pin end, you will blow up your strip. Now, I did add an extra RGB item into the system because I wasn't quite sure on what fans I was going to use. When I started filming this video, I was going to use the Lian Li Bora fans, but I thought, hey, I use them a lot. They don't have the Aura Sync compatibility. So I went with the new Thermaltake Ring Trio fans. Now by default, they don't have Aura Sync compatibility. You do have to purchase, I think it's a $29 US sync module, which is pretty sweet. It takes up to 9 fans, and it does have PWM output directly to your motherboard, so you completely bypass the Thermaltake software, all of that. So before, when I mentioned adding the devices into that RGB splitter, this is just an extra device I had to add, and that means now I can get everything in sync. The only thing I didn't get in sync was the on this video card. If you're familiar with the Galax HOF, it does have the RGB power terminals light up. I just sort of stuck them at white, so when you do see the different modes go through, that's the only sort of off, only sort of thing that's a bit off. It's not right. I should have probably just turned them off, but I guess if you did have this video card and you had a full RGB setup, once you were set on your theme, you could just set the color to match. It's just that you can't implement their software to sync with Aura. You just have to do it afterwards. Now, I was going to go through each of the modes separately, but I'm just going to go through all the modes at once. I'll just play some music in the background just so you can see. I've actually recorded the actual Aura software, so you can see which modes they are, and you can see how the actual system interacts and how it looks. Now I must admit that looks pretty cool, especially having everything in sync. Now I'm not sure how well it looks on camera, but in person it looked really good. All the colors were really vibrant. Now that's actually the first time I've actually had a full all-in-one synced RGB system, and I was quite sort of blown away at how everything works and interacts together. A few little things I do want to mention is with the RGB streamer cables, the GPU cable does not come with the I/O controller. To me, I don't think that's a big deal. Only the 24 pin comes with the I/O, sort of the controller that sits at the back. Personally, I wouldn't use it. I don't think it's needed to sort of run. Well, it is needed if you don't have any RGB source to sort of power it and control it. But if you've got a motherboard that has the compatibility to control it, I would definitely use that, just so you're not always reaching around the back of your system to control it. Another thing to keep in mind if you're doing a complete sync system like this, just keep in mind which RGB memory you use, whether it's got Aura compatibility. You just got to check on the RAM website, and it normally has their little logos if you want everything to run together. Some of them have their own software, but that software then won't interact with other things, say like your motherboard and so on. Now, one last thing, as I said earlier, with having too much light in your case, this system wasn't too bad. I did notice sometimes when I had a very bright, like if everything was all white, the cables did look a little bit washed out. So just keep in mind, if your system is all black, like my main system, the cables are really vibrant, or the 24 pin is really vibrant, which I have. And one more thing is, especially with the GPU cables, I'm not sure if you can see here, they are quite bulky and quite thick, so it's going to be really hard to get this side panel on. Mainly because this case is very sort of narrow in the GPU section. Most cases should be fine. It doesn't really make it too much bigger than your GPU 8-pin cables, but it does make it a little bit bulky if you've got the sort of the cable combs on there as well. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, that's pretty much it on this video. I just want to thank Lian Li for sending this out to check out. I want to thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for next time.